Welcome to the Money Study Podcast with Jim Bishopp. In this podcast, we bring lessons on personal finance to life, helping you achieve the dignified retirement you deserve. Jim will guide you through practical financial strategies and tips to manage your money during your working life and through retirement. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Money Study with Jim Bishopp. Jim, how's it going today?
I am living the dream as always, Eric. How about you, man?
I am as well. I see that you have somebody sitting next to you. It looks like we have a guest on the show today.
We do. Some of you have probably seen him before. My brother, Steve Bishopp, he's one of our financial advisors. Been with us for how long, Steve? 20 plus?
23, 24 years, 25 years. I lost count a long time ago.
Deliberately. He wants to put it out of his head and not remember how long we've been sitting side by side.
So I hear we're talking about cash flow today. And honestly, the main thing I know about cash flow is it's probably better to have more coming in than going out. Do I have that part right?
Yeah.
I guess we're done here.
Yeah. Wrap it up.
Bye. Time to go.
Yeah.
All right. So how are we diving into this today?
So I think we're going to look at three parts here. We're going to talk about understanding spending. Where does your spending go? The income that's coming in, and how do we divide that up into different categories in spending? Along with that is obviously budgeting. So we got to know, you don't have to know, but it makes more sense if you know what your budget is, where your money's going, where it's, you have specific goals that you're looking to budget for, those kinds of things. Then in the third part of the series, I think we're talking about paying off debt, which is huge for retirement planning. Debt is pretty much the enemy of your financial goals in most cases.
I'll add a little bit there. So, I was looking through the searching around on the internet just because I was playing around, and we've done this sort of in three parts for years when we talk to clients and help them understand that. I think the government's been looking at our playbook a little bit because I went to mymoney.gov, and it's actually the exact four pieces of managing your money that we talk about. The fourth one, though, is keeping track of where you are, reviewing it. But yeah, so I mean, it's remarkable how consistent this conversation is across different platforms with different people who espouse the need for that. So.
Yeah. And I know that, so this is a 3-part series is what you're telling me.
That's right.
And I want to make sure the audience knows that. So part 1 today is understanding spending. And obviously this topic can go for anybody, right? But you specifically work with people that serve others, right? So we're talking teachers and firemen, policemen, civil servants, if you will. So how did this topic, does that change anything for this podcast, being that your audience is mainly built around those people?
I think sort of it does. I mean, we know that teachers are historically underpaid. Public service is pretty much underpaid. So getting a good handle on your finances, I think, is vitally important to these people. It's not like, a teacher is making $300,000 a year and, could spend money willy-nilly, if you will. Having control of your finances and where the money's going is going to make their life easier. That said, even if you are making $300,000-$400,000 a year, you should probably still do a budget because it's nice to know where your money's going. Yeah. It comes in the front door, but how does it leave? And because it always leaves. And so trying to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So for today's topic, where do we start?
I think let's talk about how to get a handle on your money and kind of where it's going. So I'll sort of kick that off a little bit and talk about the fact that you probably ought. One great starting spot is to just go through your bank account and look for opportunities where maybe you have recurring expenses that you could cut down on, right? So, we're obviously brothers. Our daughters live together, so we're constantly talking to them about this stuff, right?
Nice.
So, my daughter went through her account recently and found a gym membership that she rarely uses, so we canceled that, right? There's $25 a month. The two girls that live together found that they could share a streaming subscription, right? So instead of having two of those, they cut one out. So now each of them saved a few bucks in that regard. So I think it's really important. Finding money is important. I once made fun of a friend of mine who picked up a nickel on the sidewalk, and I said, times are hard. I made some smart comment to him, and he's like, "Nope, I collect money." That's
it's a great way to put it. Yeah,
right. I mean, absolutely. Good point. I never made that joke again, and I never made fun of anybody who did that. Steve and I both have change cups in our drawers, right? I mean, to this day, we keep all of that stuff. I mean, money is money, and it counts. Yeah. And so, I think it's important to try to find as much of that as you can.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I mean, it's when you start looking at a budget, you'll find lots of holes in your bucket, right? Where money drains out into places you didn't realize you drained out. And for me, when I've done it, I look at dining out. Yeah, maybe a little too much of that for me. It's, lunchtime and that kind of thing. it's easier for me to go pick up a sandwich than to bring a brown paper sack to work. And I don't know if it's easier, but that's what I do and got in a habit of it. And so try to correct that and put some more bucks in my pocket. Yep.
Yeah, I think it really starts young, right? You have to learn how to respect money to begin with. And it's interesting. You were talking about your buddy picking up a nickel. When I was a kid, I was trying to learn how to, flick those pennies.
Oh yeah.
You ever all did that, right? So flicking pennies. I was at my dad and I were walking through the airport. I'll never forget it. Going to pick up my mom, and I had a paper route. So I had too much money for my age, right? I didn't have any concept of how valuable it was. But I did that with a penny. He's like, "What are you doing?" I go, "I just flicked a penny." He goes, "Okay." And then I flicked a dime. He lost his mind. Like, why did you go get that? Like, what? It's just a dime. It's just 10 cents. Right. Oh yeah. But I had to learn some valuable lessons as a kid. And then I think as we transition into adulthood, it's not so much valuing the money because we understand it, we respect it. It's planning, right? It's understanding that we need to do a little bit more planning, not like financial planning, but planning for that brown bag, planning not to stop on, at some place on the way to work because we were just too lazy to get up 5 minutes early for breakfast or whatever. Guilty as charged multiple times. Now that I work at home, not so much.
Easier, right? Well, the pandemic did that to a lot of people too, right? I mean, a lot of people have figured out they got a lot more money squirreled away because they're working at home and they're not driving by the coffee house or the place or.
Yeah, people learn to cook. That's a good thing too. Learn some skills.
Right. Yeah, some home improvement stuff, right?
Yeah, that's right. Or if you don't learn to cook, you lose weight. One of the two.
Yeah, not eating out is good for me in 2 days, 2 ways, right? Financially, and we'll let you figure out the other one.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I learned that lesson as a young entrepreneur, and I started this business when I was 22 years old. And we had zero money. I had to go to Baskin Robbins and get trash can that was an old, an ice cream bucket because we had no more money for trash cans after I bought 4 metal desks for the people who were coming with me. And, we learned how to go through a budget and figure out where that excess was and save every dime because we had no choice at that time, way back in the day.
Yeah. So let me ask you guys, what kind of tools, do you have? What kind of resources can you offer people that are needing to take this step, looking into all their monthly expenses? It sounds like a pretty daunting task.
That's important, right? We use the word budgeting and I kind of wish we hadn't used it or we talked about leaving it out because it's kind of a 4-letter word for most people. This really doesn't have to be that hard. It's not like you have to live by this strict, every penny counted for spreadsheet budget. We have some tools and tricks that will help you understand as we go. But Steve, we've been talking about some ideas around that too.
So there's lots of things you do. A lot of the major banks, depending upon who you bank with, if you go into your checking account, they'll have a spending tool in there and they'll have categories for you. So you can say, check my spending. It'll go through and say, this is your rent. This is what you spend on food. And it'll have some very broad categories and you can add more categories to it. Then if they miscategorized your mortgage payment of whatever, $1,000 to groceries, once you change it back to rent or mortgage, it'll be there forever. So it'll give you a few, 5 or 6 broad categories, and you can add more categories into it, like entertainment or movies or clothes or what have you. So that's one really good way to take a look at it. You can also just do it on a pad of paper, right? You can look at the important things, right? You got your rent, you got utilities, you got food and transportation, the kind of the 4 cornerstones that everyone's going to have. You can do it on a pad of paper. And then there's a ton of free software. If you just do a simple internet search on Google, obviously, or on budgeting, there's all kinds of free software out there that will allow you to do it. You can link your accounts. You can link various checking accounts if you have more than one. It'll integrate them all and just kind of give you a built-in spreadsheet that shows you exactly what you have.
Yeah.
So it's
I'm
pretty
sure
easy.
There's apps too, right? There's got to be apps for the phone.
For sure.
It's just getting a reputable one, I suppose, is the real question, making sure that you've got one that is secure and protected.
Yeah. So on the issue of apps being secure, remember that some of those guys are, a lot of them are free, but some of them are out to sell you something, credit cards and, whatever else they have, bank loans and different things. So just be aware of that. Be careful. Don't be susceptible to that, but they are valuable tools. On the issue of categorizing your expenses, that's how every business on the planet operates, right? I mean, every check I write out of SJI Financial Services gets categorized to something. So I can run a report that says, this is what we're spending on rent. This is what I spend on copy paper. This is what we spend on food, everything. And so if we have to do a little tightening or a little cleaning up, we can identify those places. People are shocked by what they find when they do that, aren't they, Steve, sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think people will find that, they spend way too much money at Starbucks, or they didn't even realize they were going to buy a gourmet coffee 6 days a week, right? And they're like, I didn't really realize I did that. And that's adding up to a couple $100 a month type of thing. And I think now when we get into other shows, especially with debt and that kind of thing, we start to look at that, and we've freed up a lot of money that can go towards travel or debt or you name it, right? It's just other places that it can go.
Yeah. I think even sometimes husbands and wives or spouses are astonished by what one spends over the other. In my household, my wife pays for certain things and I pay for certain things, but I think she's a little sometimes shocked by how much money we spend eating out, because that's always in my budget. But when we look at that in a category, she's like, holy moly.
All I know is my wife spends a lot more than I do.
Every month, every day, every week, every month.
At least that's what I tell her.
Yeah. That's a story I'm going with, and I'm sticking to it.
That's it. That's
it.
Yep. Yeah. And it's interesting because same thing. I'm married, and what do we need versus what do we want?
Right.
And so we're doing some repairs around the house, so on and so forth. I'm like, hey, darling, I got to go get this. It's going to be a tool. I'm going to have to spend about this much money. And she'll look at me like, do you need it?
All right.
And then we'll have the conversation. Well, I don't need it, but I can hire so-and-so to do the work. Here's the cost difference. And, and it keeps me occupied for a few hours out of your hair. Go get the tool, honey. Go get the tool.
There are hidden benefits sometimes to tool acquisitions, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Well, and needs and wants are a big thing for especially couples to talk about, right? And because my needs and my wife's needs are two different things, so to speak, right? And well, not needs, but wants really are two different things, right? I want more toys and she wants more things for the house. And so that's just how it works. And so being able to come to a compromise on that when you're setting up a budget and looking through your expenditures and those kinds of things becomes very important. So when you set up a budget, I think it's really important that you do it with the significant other, right? You guys have to have an open, honest conversation about this, saying there's some fixed costs, housing costs are pretty much fixed, right? You got rent or upkeep and this kind of thing. But when we get down into dining out and new clothes and these kinds of things, those probably for most people fall into the want category, right? And so making sure that you have a good understanding of each other avoids a lot of conflict down the road when you start getting into how to spend it and debt reconstruction and those kinds of things. So really important to have the conversation, I believe.
Stuff for the house never resonates with me. I could eat off of cinder blocks and a 2x4 and call it a day, but apparently my wife doesn't see it that way. So so we have to, compromise.
Some of us are more savage than others.
But what do you say?
I will say this. I did find it interesting, going through these line items, that everything that is being purchased for my grandchildren in my wife's mind is a need. I don't know how that worked, but there's never a want there. It's all needed. So that's fun.
We have that conversation a lot with folks, right? That are, up against the wall a little bit with retirement. And they want to, they want to provide for their children or their grandchildren in a way that, whatever they want to do. But, if you can look at the true dollars and then think about like what that could equate to down the road, maybe it changes your thinking a little bit.
Or what it could cause down the road, right? Overspending early. I certainly don't want to spoil my grandchildren and then live with my kids. You know what I mean?
That's exactly right. That's exactly what we talk about.
It's a great analogy, right? And so, and then you also got to look at the opportunity cost of the money, right? So if we can cut X amount of dollars out of the budget and we put it into the vacation fund or we invest it or something along those lines, what does that do? And is it worth cutting out 4 cups of coffee out of your budget a week to save X amount of dollars so you can go to Hawaii or help start to pay that fund to go to Hawaii, those kinds of things? So we call opportunity costs. And so that's different for everyone as well, right? So that's why conversation and communication is so important between the people looking at it.
Steve and I went to the same high school. We had the same econ teacher, and I don't know whether she resonated with both of us quite the way she did with me, but there was something on the wall that it was an acronym TANSTAFL, TANST. I got to think about that.
And Staffel. Okay.
Yeah. It means there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And that's absolutely right. If you're going to spend money here, it's money you don't have for retirement, for college education, for that new car, for whatever other goals you have. So you have to make sure when you spend $1 that's where you want to spend that dollar. And I think it's also important to say, we're not, we're not saying you shouldn't have luxuries in your life or things that you enjoy or do do the things that make you happy, but maybe in some moderation, or some things that aren't as rewarding to you as others, you could cut out or limit or reduce, or maybe even just like change where you get them. So my daughter used to work at a Brugger's, right? I shouldn't plug Brugger's, a coffee shop, an unnamed coffee shop.
They sold bagels.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sold round discs. Yes. Got it.
Boiled donuts. They had a coffee card, right? So for $200, you could get all the coffee you wanted every day. And, that is far cheaper than going to, the gourmet coffee, unnamed gourmet coffee shop as well for the caramel macchiato.
Oh, that's my favorite.
Well, I tell all my clients this. I go that there's this fine line that changes for everyone between saving for tomorrow and living today.
Yeah.
And that line, a lot of times for a particular individual, is a moving target, but you got to figure out kind of where that is and live with those decisions, right? And so my wife and I are a perfect example. Based on what I do for a living, I'm more about saving for tomorrow, right? But my wife's more about spending today. So it kind of ends up being a pretty good balance for us. But I think everyone's going to find that line.
It's a good balance after you get through the arm wrestling match.
Exactly. And I usually lose.
Right. Yeah. Steve touched on something too, like what is the opportunity cost, right? So I think it's really easy to think that $25 you cut out of your monthly savings or monthly expenses isn't that important. It's not that big a deal. It's $25. Mm-hmm. Well, I did some simple math. If we found $25 a week that we could cut out of your budget, and I'm making this up completely, doesn't include fees and expenses. So when my lawyers watch this, they don't have to get excited. But if we could make 6% per year on that over 20 years, that $25 a week is worth $13,287. Well, you do that a couple, 3-4 times, it is a significant number of dollars over time, right? It does add up and it does count.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bottom line is, I think it's pretty easy to do. Budgeting words should be probably thrown out of vernacular. And it's more like, I wrote this down, is planning your expenses or planning your spending, right? We plan lots of other things in our life. We plan on how we're going to save money for retirement. We plan on vacations. We plan on family get-togethers, Christmas, this kind of thing. But this is what budgeting is, except it's just more on a micro level. It's more month to month, paycheck to paycheck. We know we get X amount of dollars coming in the front door. We plan on how that money is going to get used. And it's not overly hard to do. There's lots of tools and things to do it, but it's really important to get a stranglehold really on your financial life. It's one of the first things that you need to do.
Right. I call it spending intentionally, right? Yeah. If I'm going to spend that dollar, I should be really intentional about where it's going, and that I don't have that dollar to spend on something else. And so, think about it how you want. But I agree. Budgeting should be out of it's just such a 4-letter word. Seems like such an arduous chore to most people. It doesn't have to be that hard. Use an app if you have the ability to do that. You can find them for free, categorizes your expenses. Periodically look through your checking account or through your expenses and just figure out where you're spending it. And if there's not a way to cut some of that fat out of that spending.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be that hard.
Nope.
So is there anything else for today's podcast before we kind of talk about what the next podcast is going to cover?
I think the thing that people think of with budgeting is when you say, hey, you need to do a budget, the first thing that pops in their mind is like, I can't spend money anymore. And that's not the case. It's just figuring out where the money's going. And it doesn't mean you can't have your lattes and your dining out and those kinds of things. It just means we're trying to figure out where the money's going for your household.
And spending it intentionally.
Correct.
Spending it the way you plan to, and thinking about where you're spending it, not just spending it willy-nilly.
Yep. Planning ahead and prioritizing. That's what it sounds like to me. Yeah. So what is the next podcast? What are we going to be covering in episode 2 of this 3-part series?
So once we've got the fat cleaned up in the budget a little bit, how can you on a going forward basis manage your money in a way that will help you to stay on track? And so we use sort of a buckets of money strategy, which we'll talk about. I think some people think about that in terms of retirement. We think about it in terms of day-to-day financial control of your assets. So, and it might include a little marital advice too in there too. So our strategy helps.
We're always good for that, right?
Stay. Part of our job, I always say, is, refereeing or marital counselor, or,
unfortunately it's true.
I wear a striped shirt and a whistle to work some days, because some people just, they just don't see it eye to eye. So we can figure out a way to get through that. It helps a lot.
Well, that's so important. I'm sorry. And no matter what part of the relationship you're in, newlyweds, you've been married 25 years, you've been married 50 years, having a third party to be able to discuss something with when you're, kind of at odds a lot of times, That's just the smart thing to do. That's just the way to go. And I know that that's something that you provide for your clients, not counseling, not therapy, but being able to look at both sides objectively and say, okay, what are your plans? What are your goals? What do you truly want to get out of life at the end of day? And do the things that each of you are doing, do they match up with what you say your goals are?
Yeah.
Because I think most couples have the same long-term goals or very similar long-term goals. It's just they maybe have different ideas on how to get there, right? Yeah. So I think that's what you provide. So if somebody's listening to this going, man, my wife and I could use that. How do they get a hold of you? How should they reach you?
They can go through our website, www.sji.us.com. They can call us, obviously, on the phone, 520-326-6133. Emails are on the site. If you want to get to one of us specifically, our bios and information is there. So, really easy to find. We encourage you to do that. We'd love to help do that, help you get that under control. And I will say there's no obligation to come and see us. Just yesterday, I saw someone who I had this exact conversation with, told them, you need to come back, do these things, come back and see us in a year, and maybe we'll be able to help you with some more investment stuff. But you need to get your budget and your planning on track, get your savings up to date where you're safe, and then we can help you. So, don't feel intimidated to come see us. We're happy to help.
Absolutely. All right. Great advice. Thank you guys so much for your time today.
You bet.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you.
Right.
Appreciate it.
You bet. And our last thank you always goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Money Study with Jim Bishopp. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Jim comes out with a new podcast, in fact, part 2 of this, it'll show up right on your listening device. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at SJI Financial Services Incorporated, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Money Study Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speaker and/or the guest and may not necessarily reflect those held by Voya Financial Advisors. Comments concerning the past performance of monetary instruments, investment indexes, or international markets are not intended to be forward-looking and should not be viewed as an indication of future results. Investment advisor representative and registered representative of and securities and investment advisory services offered through Voya Financial Advisors, Inc., member SIPC. SJI Financial is not a subsidiary of nor controlled by Voya Financial Advisors.